Welcome to Chess News. Today I want to take a look at the game that was played between Morozevich and Pono during the 6th round of the Tal Memorial. It was a very funny game, and I suppose the theme of the game could be Moro inflicts Poena on Pono, something like that. Okay, let's get right to the action. d4 was played, knight f6, and Ponomarev defends himself with the Nimzo Indian, like this. It's the c5 variation. And now with knight a6, black prepares to recapture the pawn on c5 with his knight. Okay, and if his knight were to appear here on c5, it would also add some pressure to the central square e4, which is the strategical goal of black in the Nimzo Indian, in the Nimzo Indian game. Also note that this knight here on c3 is pinned, so that would mean that black really has some hold over the e4 square. But now Morozevich plays a very funny, interesting move, and I didn't manage to find it in any of the databases, and I suppose this is really his hallmark. He manages to find moves which really make his opponents think for themselves, and he played here a very surprising c6, not allowing the black knight to go to c5 and eliminate this pawn. Now of course black has a very decent answer, indeed takes c6, but especially in conjunction with a3 and the subsequent exchange of the black squared bishop on c3, this bishop here on c8 is really quite a bad piece. And we can see that also all these black squares are really weakened, you know, in black's camp. I mean, I could click them all. They're all so weak. Okay, so this is the game. And Pono must have thought, well, you know, I put my knight on a6 to take the pawn on c5. Well, there is no longer any pawn here, but I suppose I should go to c5, because otherwise Moro maybe will play b4 and my knight will look stupid on a6. Okay, so here goes, knight c5. But even though the position is still equal, Moro manages to find a very dangerous idea which his opponent actually falls for. Now he plays bishop e3, immediately activating his, so to speak, black squares. And I think that Ponomarev now made a mistake. He played knight ce4, probably underestimating the hold that white has on the black squares, and also underestimating the fact that both his knights will be in trouble very soon. Better would have been to play the other knight to e4, because then the move that was played in the game, namely queen e5, could very well be answered by f6, and black would have a significant advantage here. Anyway, back to the game, where after bishop e3, in my humble opinion, Pono played the wrong knight to e4, namely the c knight. And now also queen e5 followed. But note that since there is a knight sitting on f6, it is not possible to chase away that queen from its dominant position with f7, f6. And furthermore, and this is what Pono must have underestimated, there is a threat to these knights here. Usually it is the case that when two knights are protecting each other, they are vulnerable, because if the one goes, you can take the other, and if the other goes, you can take the one. In this case, of course, the knight on f6 is still protected, but can you think of a good square where the knight on e4 could go were it attacked? Now let's get rid of this green stuff here and investigate this question a little bit further. This knight here is in danger. Could it go here? No, it would be taken. Could it go here? No, of course not. Could it go here? No, of course not. Could it go here? No, it would be taken by the queen. Could it go here? No, it would be taken by the pawn. Could it go here? No, of course not. It would be taken. So probably the only safe square would be here. But can you imagine that when the knight were to go there, and subsequently a white rook would emerge on d1, this knight would really be in danger. I suppose that maybe you could still defend the knight then by means of knight e8, but then of course c4, c5 wins the pinned knight. Maybe there would be some kind of a trick with knight d6 going to c4, also harassing white's queen. But I'm sure that, yeah, the white rook could then take the queen on d8. Black would then be forced, of course, to take the queen on e5. And then knight takes knight would leave white a piece up, because the rook on d8 is not attacked. Remember that the knight is in between on e8. Okay, so that is a little bit of philosophizing about this position. So this means that this knight is in danger. Now let me get rid of these arrows because they and but probably Pono didn't think how white could make use of that immediately. But as a matter of fact, Morozevich is threatening here to play his favorite move, being g2, g4. And then we have seen that this knight really can't move because there is not a safe square, and that also, of course, the threat is g4, g5, eliminating the defender from this knight to this knight. And that would really mean that both knights are in danger. So this is absolutely the moment for Pono to be very worried about the threat g2, g4 and take some measures against it. Now, he could have done so in playing h6 or h5, which are both prophylactic moves against the thrust g4, g5, of course. Also an idea would be to step out of the pin on the d file with a move like queen e7, because then the knight could go to d8 in a more safe way, and then eventually be rerouted, for instance, to f5. Suppose that white would still have an advantage here as a move like queenside castles, for instance, but at least he would not lose a knight. And a fourth option would be to play b6 to prepare the knight retreat to c5 eventually. Now maybe after g4 this would lose a pawn, for instance g4, knight c5, bishop takes c5, pawn takes c5, queen takes c5, but at least he would only lose a pawn and not a knight. Anyway, after queen e5, Pono must have been sleeping still, because he played here b5, completely ignoring the threat to his knights. And, well, let's be honest, it's not a move you see every day, unless you're playing Morozevich, of course, because now he plays g4, endangering the knights. Well, I think that Pono sank into deep thought here, and he must have been kicking himself, you know. He could have saved his knights with a move like queen e7, as we saw earlier, but now he's going to lose one of them. It's really incredible. Okay, what did he play here? I think he just tried to make the best of it with c5, clamping down on some black squares here and preparing, of course, the check on a5 after Morozevich played g5. So queen a5 now. But Morozevich now has the very strong b4, attacking the queen, and after c takes b4, it's still not check, because there is a black pawn on b4, so this gives Morozevich the time to win one of the knights. G takes f6. Okay, now the other knight, of course, is in danger here on e4, and Pono now decides to protect it with bishop b7. Let's have a look at b takes a3, which is also something he could have played, of course. Then any piece to d2 would be sufficient for white to win the game. For instance, bishop d2 would be strong enough. Note that this move is not possible, because then of course queen takes a5 would follow. Okay, after bishop d2 there is just simply not enough compensation for the lost piece. Okay, let's go back to the game. After g takes f6, Pono played bishop b7, and now this is where Morozevic's technique started to waver. Very funny, because, you know, usually he is so good in tactical positions, but I've noticed sometimes that when the positions become more technical, his technique starts to waver sometimes. But still, you know, this is a position with complications, and especially when you're a piece up, I suppose you should be able to find maybe more convincing lines. I think the most convincing way to go about it here would have been just to win this pawn. And then after queen takes b5, c takes b5, and a move like b3 in queenside castles, black can resign. There's absolutely not enough compensation here for the lost piece. No attacking chances here whatsoever. Okay, but after bishop b7, Moro played bishop d2, and now there followed rook fc8. This was probably not the strongest move. Maybe it was a little bit better to take this brutal bishop, and then after knight d2 play something like g6. Of course white would still be winning, but probably it would take a little bit longer in this case. Okay, Pono played rook fc8, and now Moro played bishop b4, of course. Queen b6 followed, and c5 followed. Now queen d8 followed. Now you wonder maybe why Pono put his queen on b6. Well, I suppose it was just to lure the pawn forward to c5, because now it is attacked, of course, by both rook and knight, and also a5 is a threat. So the bishop here on b4 is not the most stable one. But first it is Morozevic's the move. He plays rook g1, activating his rook, and of course threatening to take on g7. So Pono now plays g6, and I suppose that here also Moro had a stronger, more convincing move. For instance, knight d4, with the nice idea of playing c5, c6, blocking the protection from the bishop to the knight, which is attacked of course still by the queen. And if the bishop were to take here on c6, then of course white would take the bishop, and on the next move take the knight on e4. If black would counter that idea with a5, then still c6 would be very strong, because if now a takes b4, then of course there would be a fork with c6 takes b7. So bishop c6 would really be necessary, and now knight c6 would suffice, but maybe even stronger would also be to develop the bishop on g2 with similar threats. Okay, but after g6, Morozovic didn't play this knight d4 idea. Maybe he just missed the idea of c5, c6, who knows. Instead he played rook d1, but now he allowed queen f6, and only now did he play c6, but he plays it without the knight on d4. So at this moment it's not really the best of ideas. I think that maybe more solid would have been just to exchange queens here, and then play rook c1, protecting the pawn on c5, sidestepping the threat of a7, a5. And of course in this position you're still a piece up for one pawn, and you've got tremendous black squares. I suppose that black could resign this position also. Anyway, he didn't play like that. He played c6. And then there followed bishop c6, and now there followed rook g4. Rook g4. Yeah. The idea is to play rook takes e4, like this, and eliminate the defender of the queen on f6. Okay, so that explains why Pono now exchanges the queens himself. And now we can see that White's knight is attacking the bishop anyway. But here it would have been possible, for instance, to play bishop d5 for Ponomaryov. And still, White is winning, but he still has to show it. Instead of bishop d5, however, Pono played here f5. Probably a bit weaker than bishop d5, because now Morozevich could take this bishop, and after rook takes c6, play the interesting bishop g2. Now Ponomaryov manages to find the best move, and it also contains a very nasty trap, a4. The trap, which was not played by Moro, would start with rook takes e4, and then after bishop takes e4, f takes e4 and bishop takes e4, rook c, c8, it would still not be too late to screw up your technical phase with bishop takes a8, because now the surprising a takes b4 would be very strong, and White would have lost most of his advantage. Now, of course, the bishop on a8 is under attack, so let's suppose bishop b7, rook b8, bishop e4, but after b takes a3, we can see that White still has a technical task ahead of him. He is still winning, I think, but it is much more difficult than if he would not play bishop takes a8 in this position. Anyway, after a5, Morozevich did not play rook takes e4, but f takes e4 rather, which is also very much sufficient for the win. Now they followed f takes e4 and bishop d2. So White is a piece up, and he still needs to find a few precise moves to win the game. Of course, now the pawn on e4 is in danger, so rook c4 protects that, and Morozevich now plays rook g5, which is the strongest move in the position. His idea is to go to the 7th rank via b5. Rook a4 was played, rook takes b5 and rook takes a3, and now rook b7. Black still has a very strong and dangerous passed pawn, but with precise play there shouldn't be any worries for Morozevich. Now the most direct way to win this game would have been to play bishop h6, but I suppose that Morozevich didn't like the looks of rook h3, which attacks the bishop on h6. But there is a very, very funny point, and it starts with rook g7 check, and now after king h8, can you see it? I will count to 5. If you like, you can pause the video. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the fantastic rook a7. Now, if rook takes bishop, then of course rook takes rook. And if rook takes rook, then rook g1, d8 is checkmate. So there we can see the strength of the bishop on h6. So that would have been a more direct way to win the game. Anyway, after a4, Morozevich played bishop f4, which is also good enough. He prepares now by opening up the d file to play rook d1, d7. And then, of course, also in conjunction with bishop h6 or bishop e5, he is completely winning, of course. So there followed rook b3 to try and break any cooperation of white rooks emerging on the 7th rank. But now it really has become a technical task. Rook takes b3, a takes b3, rook b1. And now, since it is not possible for black to protect his pawn with rook b8, he first tries to distract white with e3. And white indulges. He doesn't want to ruin his pawn structure by playing f takes e3, so he plays bishop takes a3, and now the square on b8 has become available. But after king d2, rook b4, it becomes more and more clear that white is simply winning. So the last threat that black is posing to white's position is to play rook h4 here. But Morozevich defends here with f3, because in case of rook h4 he could play bishop g1, very simply protecting the h2 pawn and then winning this one. But after f3, Ponomarev didn't play rook h4, he played e5, and then Morozevich just played bishop f2, preventing rook h4. And I suppose Ponomarev had had enough at this moment, and he resigned here. So that means that that's already his third win, I think. So he's now in the lead with 4.5 points out of 6. Kudos to Morozevich. I also learned through Susan Polgar's blogspot that this means that now virtually he is the #1 in the world. So congratulations. If he manages, I think, to win one more out of the remaining 3 games, he is secure in this position. So then he shouldn't play for the rest of the year until the new FIDE list is published, and then he will be the new #1, I suppose. So very interesting developments there on the rating list. Okay, well, that ends our discussion of this Moro Pono game. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Please, until next time.